Welcome back to the Woven Energy Podcast on Real Practical Shamanism with me, Joseph Sikora, and of course, Damon Smith. We are here once again to talk about shamanism from the ground up. So, in this lesson, in this lesson, episode, guide, whatever you want to call it, we are going to continue our journey into stage 4 of practical shamanic technique, or stage 4 of how to become a shaman, if you will. So, we're following on from last week, which was our introduction into stage 4. And in true woven energy style, in true woven energy fashion, Damon and I had a bit of a chat afterwards, and we kind of came to the conclusion that perhaps there's a few missing pieces of the puzzle for stage 3. So rest assured that whilst we are continuing down the road of stage 4, we will be having a look at the previous episodes we've done on stage 3, kind of organising those and also adding to them as time goes on. So I am very much the student for this episode, so I'm going to take a back seat and allow Damon to entertain us all. Damon, how are you doing, man?
I'm good, mate. How are you?
I'm excellent. Been for a walk, cleared my head, and I'm now ready and looking forward to this episode.
Ready to go. Yeah, so like you said, as we were doing recording the last one, which is just like the introduction to stage 4, there were so many times I was thinking, oh no, we didn't cover that, and we didn't cover that. So yeah, considerable amount of stage 3ing to go back to, I think. But anyway,
I'm looking forward to having a look at what episodes we've already done and kind of putting those into an order, and then continuing that kind of series, and really organising these episodes now into blocks. You know, like we've got a stage 2 block, a stage 3 block, a stage 4 block, and it can be fluid, but at least we can kind of have a structure to them.
We haven't strayed too much from that. You know what I mean? It wasn't exactly we didn't exactly have a plan when we set out on this, did we, originally? So I think the fact that it's turned out reasonably structured is quite impressive, especially because I'm involved, you know. I'm not renowned for my structured approach to things. So
no, we're very much just going wherever it wants to go.
Yeah.
Which is very shamanic.
So, and just before I crack on, quick shout out to some patrons. Roger Twitchell, Saul, I think I've thanked you guys already, but I couldn't remember which podcast on, so I'm thanking you now for signing up and becoming some of our awesome patrons. That's great, guys. And our latest patron, old friend of mine, Rich Clements, you're a superstar, sir. Your support is greatly appreciated. And it's a long time since we've seen each other, but it's just, I'm assuming it is you, mate. I can't think anybody else it would be. So it'd be great to meet up sometime. And it's thanks to all our patrons as usual.
I was going to say, and of course, thanks to all our existing patrons. You can go to patreon.com/wovenenergy, and you can see all sorts of weird and wonderful things you get if you sign up and become a patron of this podcast.
And more coming shortly in the patrons area. So
yes, we had a talk about that, didn't we, the other day? So.
Well, I think we said we've got to drive to get some more stuff in there, Grove-related stuff. So we're going to do that. So onto the subject of the day, which is like the next, I don't know if you call it the next step in stage 4. I think that set the scene for a bit. We did last time, we did in the discussion, but let me really focus in on what it is I want to talk about on this one. If you recall, I talked about standing patterns of energy emerging through your spirit dance. And, you know, if you've done a lot of spirit dance practice, then you'll probably know what I'm talking about, especially if you've managed to maintain your chillicity throughout that and put a bit of richness into your spirit dance. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, that's not a problem. It just means you need to work on your spirit dance a bit more. You're level 3 or you're level 2 or you're level 1 or preferably all 3.
Did you say standing exercises? Stage 3 exercises? Sorry.
No, standing patterns of energy that emerge through spirit dance practice. That's a kind of foundational notion of level 4, which is basically the weave, right? The woven energy, the weave. That's what our podcast is named after, is level 4. The patterns that emerge through the spontaneous movement that goes on within your dance, they have a momentary aspect to them But as you become more experienced in your level 3 practice, you find that those patterns extend ahead of and behind you. They have a life that lives longer, that the energy transition patterns have a life that lives longer than the temporal moment that you're in. Ironically, that's especially true when you are hanging in the moment and you have no thought for what's coming next and no thought for what's gone past. You're simply hanging in the moment. That is the time at which these things will extend the furthest when you're in that, in Tai Chi Chuan, this is called man. It's like that, sometimes it's translated as slowness, but that's not what it means. It's that having no concern for what's gone before and no thought for or desire for what's coming next. You're in an entirely spontaneous mode of action within your spirit dance. So that means that you must, whatever movements you're using within your spirit dance, you must be able to practice level 4, you must be able to do all of those movements, or all of those, they're not so much movements, they're patterns of energy or patterns of momentum. You must be able to use all of those movements without thought, every single one of them. If you're introducing a new movement into your spirit dance, this is not the time to be practicing level 4. This is the time to be practicing level 3, 2, and 1. These are all we're talking about at level 4. We're talking about movements that have been entirely internalized, that you can be done without thought, and you can switch constantly and fluidly between one and another without making conscious decisions as to about what you're going to do next.
Well, I like that term you just said, patterns of momentum. That makes it a bit clearer.
That's how it feels to start off with, is patterns of momentum. And gradually, over time, with practice, it starts to feel less like patterns of momentum and more like patterns of energy, threads of energy. But actually, the one leads into the other, so then they're not different from each other. That is the first, so what you could say is the energy involved in the dance, the most prevalently obvious thing within the Amskar is the momentum of the movement often. And we talked about the aspects of Chalicity, physical Chalicity, previously that give support to that. You are a vessel form. I am composed of transitional positions between, for instance, in the type of spirit dance that I do, I have these two extreme positions, Tirelt and Havtas, which are the most extended and the most contracted positions, physical positions that I make typically in the dance. But it's not always those limitations. There are, my spirit dance is quite rich, so there's all kind of stuff goes on in there. And then you have the flesh hanging on the bones with the ashgri, that kind of flesh hanging on the bones, and the simultaneous heavy and light thing going on. You have the springiness of the body, the energy being continually stored and released like a bow under tension, a numluch. You have the aspect whereby this is very momentum based. The momentum is contained throughout all parts of the structure, as if you have bangles on your limbs and maybe around your neck, and well, actually literally bangles everywhere, or hula hoops or something, and they are contained. That's the borki. And then you have the sense of sliding under nature, and the shoulders being suppressed and rounded. That's muruch and bantaglach. Those senses within all of that stuff that goes on. Remember, once you're doing it without thought, then there is a strong sense of threads of momentum that come through that milieu, that mixture, if you like, of physical Chalicity. And through the Amskar, they are revealed to you, if you like. You don't really do them, they're revealed to you through the Amskar. And this is actually what gives rise to all of the subsequent movement, because you're hanging in the middle realm. You're hanging in the root, the trunk of the tree, of the world tree. That's the place.
To get a feel for this, one thought sprung to mind when you were talking just then, and that is when you have to get a feel for the momentum, when you have a heavy object and you are setting that object, you're holding an object and you sort of set it in motion, and then you use your body to be able to keep that object flowing without stopping or cutting or anything like that. Is the feeling similar to that?
Yeah, it's like you are the object.
without the object. Yes.
Yes, you are the object. Yeah, yeah. So imagine a ball on the end of a piece of string that you're swinging around your head. You are that.
Yeah, I'm
ball
immediately
in a
reminded
sense.
of the Indian club kind of exercises where you very much set it going and then you keep the momentum flowing in a continuous cycle.
There's lots of stuff like that. And we often use the staff. When we did the shamanism seminar over in Austria, we used just these long staves that Tam would cut from some of the lovely trees up there. They're not short of trees in that location. It's a great location to do a shamanism practice. And we just whirling these things around and it gives a sense of you're using it as a tool within the spirit dance. It definitely gives a sense that you can then of how an object under momentum, a natural item under momentum behaves. You in terms of the moment to moment transitions and changes, so that the thing's not stopping. There's a continuous flow there. And then all you've got to do is internalize that idea. It's a bit like spirit animals, but with a stick, right? You're becoming the stick rather than becoming the spirit animal. That's the idea.
I mean, personally, I remember doing it with the spear. I had a few months where I got obsessed with the spear work, and it was so tough to begin with. But then you just kind of develop all the subtle movements and the feel for it, and then all of a sudden the spear just moves, and it's like. You're not quite, you're just nudging it, aren't you? You're just sort of nudging it wherever it needs to go.
Yeah.
But it's very much moving under its own momentum.
Spear is a great item to practice this kind of stuff with. I mean, I think one of the reasons is that as human beings, we're naturally adapted to the use of those kind of tools. We've been using spears for an awful long time. And we're probably almost certainly better at spear than any other animal. Although, some orangutans probably will give us a run for their money. I don't know if you've seen some of the spearfishing orangutans.
I've seen that, yeah. There's a bit of debate whether that's a trained orangutan or whatever it was.
Well, we did that domestication of the dog thing. There's a question what trained actually means. Because animals under captivity are often training humans to do exactly what they want, It's who is being trained, who is the trainer and who is the trainee is not always obvious. I think we spend, especially with cute dogs like pugs and stuff, quite interesting.
Well, what do they reckon? They reckon chimps are in the. I think it might be chimps. It might be some other species, but they reckon they're in the Stone Age. They're in their very own Stone Age right now. So
yeah, but I mean, the thing is that what's of value to them? I often worry about these things. What's the most intelligent animals and stuff like that. I think it was in one of those Douglas Adams books where he was talking about dolphins being the most intelligent animals on the planet because human beings think they're intelligent because they, go to work, they drive cars, they have all these stresses in life, have those pressures on them, and they can deal with complex mathematics, some of them can anyway, and deal with all these kind of complicated social dilemmas and problems that we create ourselves, if you want to paraphrase the miasma. Whereas all dolphins do is spend all their time splashing around in the water and having fun. And so humans thought humans were more intelligent because of this fact, and dolphins thought dolphins were more intelligent because of this same fact.
Well, it's like, what is intelligence? What is intelligence? I mean, I spent an hour just lying on my back watching. Is it the starlings that have that incredible flight in the air where there's a huge? Is it starlings? There's a group of them, and they just form these unbelievable shapes. And
it's almost like smoke, isn't it? It just looks like smoke, but it's intelligent smoke.
I mean, there's something about that.
No, that's an intelligence.
That is majestic.
That is an intelligence. Yeah, cool. So anyway, sorry, I was still.
But isn't that part of the weave? Isn't that like if you watch the starlings?
For sure,
that's like a momentum that they're going at as a big group, isn't it? It just flows one into the next, right?
Great image of what you're trying to achieve with your spirit dance, absolutely.
Yeah.
But we're not talking about spirit dance. I was in the middle of laying some foundation before because I haven't got onto what the episode's about yet. But all I wanted to say is, as we said in the last one, you end up with these sort of standing patterns of energy that emerge out of your spirit dance. And in terms of that being useful to you, in terms of you learning something from nature through that, we said that you want those standing patterns to have a certain complexity to them. You want them to become a weave or a tapestry or some sort of story, an embroidery, if you like, of life, of nature, within your life, within your shamanic play, within your Toshal team. And it's a very artistic thing in one sense, in that it's a very creative thing, but it's definitely not a design thing. There is nothing being planned up front. And I think this is an important distinction between what you might call shamanic art and normal art, is that there's some sense in much artwork of a prior notion of what the art will become. You hear stories about great sculptors who can visualize the story inside, the statue inside a block of stone before any stone has been removed. And all they're doing is they're simply removing the stone that surrounds the statue that's kind of already in there. That's great art. You think of the statue of David and, all this wonderful artwork that came from the past. The painters of the Renaissance, those guys, showing the close linkage between art and science and humanity in a very beautiful and expressive way. But there is a distinction between that and shamanic art. In shamanic art, there is no prior conception of what will emerge, none whatsoever.
Yeah. I mean, sorry to bring it back to music again and piano, but that is absolutely, it's like, on the one hand, you can sit there and go, I'm going to create a piece of music and I'm going to use these chords, I'm going to use this type of melody shape, and the song, the piece is going to materialize through, logic and following a map. Or you can sit down, light some candles, get into the moment, and music just materializes. There is an absolute difference between those two. It's like one isn't better than the other. A lot of pop music is written by ones and zeros and following an instruction map. But
exactly,
it's absolutely the case that you can just rely on the foundation of your skill and let that skill flow through you more as you being a conduit to that rather than thinking about it.
Absolutely. So there's, just as with a lot of things like that, one of the ways that some people start with art, with painting, is just to paint a straight line. And then I guess you paint a circle and that type of stuff. And this is not so much what you do. You don't learn to create a straight thread of energy in spirit dance. It emerges through your spirit dance practice. But in that lightweight observation of self, Amska kind of way, which also extends up into level 4, you start to develop the first skill of level 4 is to develop the sense of that thread. Now, not often because we use so many different languages on this podcast, I'm often apologizing about various pronunciations. And often it's that my Mandarin is the one I apologize for the most. But I'm going to apologize for Mongol, actually, because this word, I find it a nightmare to pronounce. That's Hatamachash. Hatamashk. It's so hard to pronounce. It's such an important thing that Hatamashk, something like that. It's just a word that I couldn't even conceive of how to write down in like Western letters. But in Damon's, the way I've written it down in Damon's, write it like you hear it, Mongol. It's Hatarmalskh. That's how I've written it down.
Hatamulch.
It definitely doesn't sound like that, mate. It's something like that. It is a nightmare if I want to pronounce. But anyway, the idea is the sense of these threads of energy. So the first thing you're looking for in building when you're out practicing your level 4 spirit dance, your spirit dance at level 4, which is the weave, is simply getting a sense of that thread, the hatamach. The idea of the thread, A thread's an easy word to pronounce. But remember, we're talking about a thread of energy or thread of momentum here.
Yeah.
But the idea of the thread can be quite difficult because when you're learning dance movements, if you're in a sort of ballroom dancing kind of, or even Latin dance or something, it's like, why are you using the term thread singular when I've got two hands, I've got 2 feet, and they have, they're moving in different directions. Where's the thread going? If my hands are moving away from each other, where is the thread going? And it's that holistic sense. That's the thread we're talking about. There's an overarching thread of self that extends through that incorporates those sort of sub-aspects of itself, but they're not sub-threads, they're sub-aspects of itself. And it's hatamash, that developing the sense of that self-thread that extends throughout your dance is kind of the very first skill that you need. And you can do that just walking in a straight line. It's possible to develop a sense of that. But for instance, if you imagine that thread being more like, imagine like you're inside some sort of a cloud of bees or something like that. I don't like to use that sense of imagination, so maybe let's not say that. Let's just say, let's keep something simple. Imagine you're inside a big plastic bag, yeah? Mm-hmm. And your hands and feet are in the corners of the bag, yeah? And let's assume you can breathe now. We're not talking about anybody suffocating or anything, yeah? Assume you can breathe, yeah? But your hands and your feet are sort of linked into the corners of that bag. Or the thing with bees is, you imagine like bees were circling around your body like a swarm, that doesn't exactly conform to the edges of your body, but is driven by the position of your head and your hands and your knees and your hips and your torso and all the different parts of your body and your chin and your nose and all this kind of stuff, your ears. As you're moving in your continuous spirit dance, that bag or swarm of bees or whatever it is morphing in shape. But even though your arms and your legs and your feet are going in different directions, perhaps even, the bag itself is constantly changing shape. It doesn't exactly conform to the exact contours of your body unless you picked a really strange bag, But it's sort of a sense, it's drawing out a sense of the overall nature of your movement in one entity. Now, you don't use the bag, although, as you might have noticed, a lot of shamans wear very rich costumes. One of the reasons for that, these very, they don't even look like costume. It looks like they've hung like, half their wardrobe and pantry off their own body. One of the reasons for those strange looking costumes is to develop this sense, this exact same sense that we're talking about.
Well, some of them will naturally leave a flow and a trail behind them, won't they?
But it's more about that is true, and that helps as well. But it's more about what I'm talking about here is it's more about there's a holistic sense of the body within the context of nature that has an overarching thread to it. Does that make some kind of sense, mate? Yeah,
it definitely does. The analogy with the bees makes more sense to me than the plastic bag, because I can imagine, dearie me. I can imagine the shape of all of the bees. It could be anything really, yes. But the particles around you, whatever it is, morphing and moving to the shape of your movements, and it doesn't necessarily. Yeah.
But I'm not saying you have to imagine that in order to practice this. What I'm saying is I'm giving a sense of what the thread singular extends out of. That's all I'm trying to give a sense of. There is no plastic bag and there are no bees. You may wear a fancy... it'd be cool to do if there were bees, actually, if they need to be fairly friendly bees. But, you don't want them stinging you. But the general idea, I'm trying to give to is that when I say a single thread, there is actually... There's an awful lot of threads, and nature is complicated, and it has an incredibly interwoven energy structure to nature. The interweaving is colossal, but within the context of your spirit dance, there is an overarching thread to it as well as all these sub-threads. Does that make sense.
Yep.
And that's this idea of hatamach that I keep mispronouncing dreadfully. At least I know I'm mispronouncing it.
That's definitely the most difficult. I mean, we've had some difficult words on this podcast before, but I think
I know what it sounds like.
Biscuit.
I can imagine in my head a native Mongol saying it, and I just couldn't copy. that's the thing. Yeah. So that's the idea, and so there's your first. Based on what we talked about last time, with you incorporating more and more rich movement, it's developing that sense of the overarching thread that stands from the beginning to end of the dance. That's the foundational notion within level 4. But then you run out of space fast. One of the easiest way to practice this is, one way I practice this is, if you take a tail position and then you bring one side of your body, you just start walking forwards. You bring one side of your body in like half-tass and then extend it out in a tail. So say you bring your right arm in. It's not just your arm, it's a sense of the whole side of your body coming in towards the center in a half-tass position, and then extend it out again into the line of travel, into that straight line of travel. And then immediately as you're doing that, the other arm is coming in from the half-tass position and extends out further as the other arm comes back. The left arm then extends out into Tiralt in the line of travel. And so you're like threading your arms forwards, where it's 2 arm movements on the face of it, but actually it's one single thread going out through all those arm movements. So you might do 20 arm movements in a straight line, but there's only one thread that those arm and body, it's not just your arm, it's your whole body extending side to side into that movement. All those 20 movements have created one thread, not 20 individual threads. Does that make sense? That's an easy way.
Yeah. Can you just remind everyone what Tiralt and Haftas is?
Tiralt, you see, that's our famous picture of the girl that goes with the Woven Energy logo on the podcast.
Slightly open. Yeah, open
that's
palms, letting nature in. We've talked about these on previous episodes.
Yeah. But I mean, again, if you need reminding what Tiralt and Haftas are, you shouldn't be listening to an episode.
Absolutely, I'm just covering the bases.
Yeah.
I think that's stage 2 we talked about that. Stage 2, the Amscar.
Where we should be going. We should be going all the way back there, and we found people back there, I think. But that is. So it's the most open position. So like your hands extended, palms turned slightly up towards the sky, your body, your sense very open to nature. Haftas is when the arms are folded into the body. You can even cross them over at the wrist, so your palms inwards across your chest, upper chest crossed upwards, but you can also cross them downwards. Or they don't actually have to be crossed. There's no exact positions to these things. But if you imagine it's an expansive open position and in a relatively close position, Haftas has the sense of a bird having folded its wings. Now, they could be folded because it stopped flying, but they could be also folded in the way that, for instance, a goshawk or a sparrowhawk will fold its wings against its body as it flies through a narrow gap between some branches, just to keep the arms out the way, or the wings out the way as it flies through there at high speed. So it's that kind of a sense, the sense of like a sparrowhawk going through the branches of trees. There's only a small gap to get through, so it folds its wings against its body. That's Haftas. That's the idea of Haftas. And a lot of my spirit dance is rich transitions between those two positions, or using one half of one and one half of the other, as I've just described. So I've got sort of the right side of the body in Haftas and the left side of the body in Tiralt, and it's the left side of the body that's leading into the line of travel, and then the left side of the body goes into Haftas and the right side goes into Tiralt, and it's that side that's now leading into the line of travel. The line of travel being simply walking forwards in a simple sense. Now, the problem with all this stuff in your spirit dance, you find this out at level 3, let alone level 4, is you run out of space if you keep going in a straight line. You're bound to, unless you're, one of the great things that you can do is walk through the surf at the edge of if you've got a great long beach or something, and you can walk through the surf, you can keep going forever. And that is wonderful, with your feet going through the water, or if it's up to your waist, or even in the swimming pool, you can do this kind of thing. You do this whole exercise in the water if the water's up to your neck. It makes a lovely movement that sort of, Haftas one side, Tiralt the other. And remember, it's the Tiralt side that's creating the thread, that's leading the thread. It's the whole body is the thread, goes all the way through the body, all the way through the torso, all the way through the legs and feet. But it's that terrelt side of the body that is forming the bow wave of the thread, the bow wave of the momentum or transfer along the thread. It's not forming the point of the thread, that's out there somewhere. It's the bow wave of the transition along that. You think of yourself, there's a way to think of yourself. Think of yourself as a cable car. The cable car is there, and it's sort of like the cable is taking you along. That's another way to think about it. None of these things are perfect analogies, but that's a way to think about it. But the point is, you're going to run out of space. So what can you do about that? Well, it's very Tadok is a very obvious way to deal with that. You've got a grove. We've talked about how to identify a grove. We did a bit of that on the Woven Energy seminar over in Austria. A grove is a nice space in which a shaman likes to practice spirit dance or whatever other techniques a shaman's into doing. Circling around that grove, taking that straight line and standing it around in a circle is an obvious and easy way to deal with the running out of space problem without having to think. Yeah. And it also, it's quite nice in that if your grove is not perfectly circular, it can get you into the idea that you might not take a perfectly circular path, but you might take a path that starts to be influenced by the nature of the land, by the trees around you, by the whatever is the rocks or whatever are there, that you might allow those things to influence your path, again, without thinking about it. Then that's a way to influence, which is what you're trying to do at level 4. It's that transition between nature influencing in you and you being your own dance, if you like. You might allow those things to influence your movement, and you can then start practicing the same thing, just moving around your grove. And you'll find if you do that movement that sometimes you want to turn and maybe go the other way or keep going in the same direction and do a spin and all this kind of stuff. Let that stuff come out. It'll start happening. Let it come out. Don't try and force it and say, oh, I'm doing the terrelt position wrong now because this other thing has come out. No, that other thing is what you're after, whatever it is. As long as it can be done in a state of Chalisti, as long as it can be done in a state of Amska.
So is it an idea to have a fairly clean grove to start with? And by clean, I mean like not many things to distract you or obstacles, and then introduce more of that, more of nature.
I don't know.
I don't know.
I think there's advantages to both.
Yeah.
If it's too pristine, too man-made, then you start losing the influence of nature, and it becomes, one of the things that I often wonder about is, because I do a lot of practice in the woods, those things, brambles we call them, I don't know what they're called in other countries, they're like long, like thin branches that run close to the ground, and they have thorns on them that can catch you, or sometimes they come down from trees and they can catch you, catch onto your clothing. And there's a question, should you clear those out the way or not? I tend not to. I quite like it when they catch me because that introduces some movement. And what you can do, some of the patrons came over a while back and we did a little grove in Cornwall. And it was wonderful. A couple of them were getting caught by these things and then they were able to spin out. It was almost like a friendly, from something that a miasmatic human would perceive as a problem. Oh no, I've been stung by some thorns or they've grabbed onto me. To nature's just given me a helping hand in deciding where my dance goes next. And the ability to release yourself, especially if you were one in particular, as a girl was there practicing. She got her jumper caught, like woolly jumper caught, and just spun beautifully. It was a beautiful spin. That just released those thorns off the jumper in a really elegant movement. I just thought, wow, that's so cool. What people can learn just listening to a podcast, absolutely brilliant. That is super, super. Shout out to Emily. That is super amazing way to demonstrate that how a spirit dance is supposed to work and is influenced by nature. It's a very physical thing, right? Being caught up on thorns.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
And also, you've got to have strong chelicity as well, because if you get spiked in the legs or the arms and stuff, I mean, that's a surefire way to get launched straight out of chelicity, isn't it?
exactly.
If you don't have strong chelicity. But,
Exactly.
we've got creams and we've got a bath to sort all that out at the end of the day.
Yeah, and you'd be amazed how little injuries I actually get practicing this stuff. Because I like to go in the thick. I was talking about going around the grove, in the open area among the trees, but I like to get in among them, especially when they're densely packed. And I'm not saying I don't get scratched sometimes and stuff like that, but considering how fast I move and how dense the vegetation is and how many thorns and things there are in there, you'd be surprised how few scratches and injuries I actually get.
Well, I imagine it's a slight extension on. I mean, back in episode 6, 5, when you're talking about the stuff that you did back in the day, you were talking about just running through the woods almost blindfold in the dead of night. You absolutely weren't recommending people do this, but you get to a kind of stage where you're flowing through it and there's so many obstacles, but you just see them very much like the goshawk flying through the branches, and the wings and everything just manipulates and moves to the environment to get through it. It's very much a similar feeling to us as humans as we run through the woods full pelt, but you're avoiding all of these things without thinking.
Exactly.
So I imagine what you're talking about is linked to that, or is
yeah,
it?
And one of the ways to practice that when you're learning, one is you go around inside your grove, but then sometimes as the sort of spirit takes you, there's a dive outside of the grove. You just fluidly move outside of the grove, in among the trees, and then you're back inside and doing your spirit dance inside the grove again. But you sort of become a woven line around the trees and bushes and what have you, plants, that form the perimeter of the grove. You're almost weaving them. And you see that in a lot of shamanistic type of, land art. And in Shinto, they used to hang big ropes in trees. They used to demarcate a sacred space with nawa, these big white ropes, called white ropes. In Shinto, they still do it. They'll demarcate the sacred space. We talked about decorating groves and stuff like that before. But in a way, you are the rope. You are weaving yourself in and out of the perimeter of your grove and decorating it with your thread, with your hatamach of energy as you weave in and out of that, in and out of the natural weave that's already there. So the circling becomes sort of, waving or moving in and out, weaving, if you like, moving in and out. And then what you tend to find is you get a sense for the momentum, and there's sort of a joy and a quickening in it. And after a while, once you've got a sense of these things, the next sort of level starts to come out. And that's what's uchlate, which is not too bad a pronunciation, I'm guessing, which is when you start spiraling the energy. And there's different types of spirals you can do. You can do a clean spiral where you sort of spiral into the center and then spiral out again. But then there's like a tightly wound on the edge spiral. You're going using high momentum, sometimes using your arm to pull yourself around a tree, under momentum. So you got that sort of turning momentum. I think what they call it in cars, they call it sideways G-force or something like that, Or if you're dancing with somebody else, Paul and I were doing this on the seminar, you just sort of lock arms and go around each other on momentum and then spin out on the other side. These spiral actions naturally start to come out of the circular, combining the circular action with the linear actions, and you end up with these spirals, and they will emerge, and they become, to a certain extent, they take over. Once you progress with your sort of level 4 training, the threads, the linear threads and the circular stuff, they start to take over. And one of the places where they take over is like in Haftas. The Haftas part of Tillin, if you remember the Tillin exercise we talked about. You take a big circle and then you tightly wind into the middle of it in a small circle and then out again. That kind of sense of a big circle continuously linked within a small circle. So you have big and small, but there's no stopping, there's no loss of the thread, is the start of getting the sense of that uchlete. which I think is not a bad pronunciation, actually.
Uchlete.
Uchlete.
Trouble is, I'm listening to you on a really bad phone call right now, so I can't really hear what you're saying. I'll have to listen back to you.
But I'm pretty sure that's a better pronunciation than Hatamausch that I did earlier.
Hatamausch.
So that Uchlete is this idea that the spiral actions take over. How the spiraling of the energy becomes the main thing. And what you find is that everything, in a certain extent, is a kind of spiraling. And the reason for that is that linear Hatamausch is quite bland. It's not really very representative of what goes on in nature. And Tarug, which is in physical terms, we already talked about this, like ergach, which is like the turning, or the elt, which is the circling. In the physical terms, that's just tarug in the sense of the energy, circular energy. That's also sort of bland. And so where this stuff comes alive, in the first place you see it as these spirals, this kind of, in certain sense, like being tightly wound like a bobbin, but then loose spirals like a slinky. And the spiraling into the center and spiraling out again gives a sense of compression and expansion. So your half-task in your tail position, you can think of the half-task in physical sense as the center of the spiral, and the half-task as the end of the spiral, and you spiral between those positions rather than just moving in and out in a kind of blind kind of way. That spiraling your thread, your overarching thread, is kind of the next level that you're looking for. Once you've got that sort of linear, then the circular, and then you're moving into the spiral.
I'm getting blasted back to what we did in a physical sense, and I'm sure we talked about this in stage 3, but or when we talked about the trigrams, the whole Gaia squall.
We're coming on to that. We're coming on to that.
Oh, good. Yeah. Because
So
Gaia is very much. What's the Mongolian terms? Because I'm using our culty Amabella terms.
We're coming to that in just a moment. Yeah. So the Mongolian terms are Shurug and Egeldech. They're the Mongol terms. But we'll come. Just hold that thought for a minute. Because there's one more thing I want to talk about before we go on to that. The next one is Doigiluk. The sense of that spiraling in, spiraling out. As I said, it doesn't have to be a bland spiral. The energy can spiral into the center and spiral outwards, or it can spiral over the top. They can happen in any plane. They can happen and do happen in any plane, in diagonal planes, and diagonally upwards, diagonally downwards, moving forwards, up and down, left and right, out. Any kind of plane these things can happen in. But within that sense, the spiral can be an even spiral, but then you can have pulses within the spiral of the thread. You can have tightly wound parts of the standing thread, and you can have loosely wound parts of the standing thread. And the tightly wound and loosely wound parts of that standing thread that you're making through your movement, they start to generate waves. They start to generate a kind of compression and expansion kind of wave, which is getting onto what you're talking about. And that's called Doigiluk. That's not what it's called. That's a Mongol word for it, Doigiluk, which is kind of to surge or to move in waves. So when I said there's a quickening within spirit dance, there's also a surging. There's a coming and going. And the best possible analogy for this that I can think of is those breakers, those waves crashing on the beach. The wave crashes onto the beach. I'm very familiar with this because we've got so many beaches in Cornwall. I can highly recommend Cornwall. If you like beaches, Cornwall is the place to be. We've got over 100 of them. The wave crashes on the beach and then it runs back down the beach. It picks up sand or shingle or whatever, shells or whatever, and it rolls back to the sea, and then it comes again and it crashes that stuff back on the beach. It's this coming and going, the surge. And then out in the deep ocean, you get these much bigger oceanic waves that aren't breaking, but they have that huge momentum, the up and down, the rise and fall, coming and going, opening and closing. And you can see that that's also in the half-task thing. But there's a sense to the compression and expansion, not just within the thread, not just within the Hatamalsh itself, but also within, remember I said it's a standing thread. Within the lines of that thread interacting with each other and interacting within the environment, within multiple parts of that one thread, which can be multiple lines going past each other, there are looser parts and tighter parts in that. And obviously the thread itself can also be wound, which is, for instance, in the martial arts Xingyi, the Xingyi classics are always advising that people do that, but that's in a martial sense because it's a sense that says the boxing must be tightly wound. That is a sensible thing to do in a martial sense. So those are like the foundational aspects of the level 4, the Gurukh. They are the woven energy, if you like. Those are the kind of foundational, I don't want to call them concepts, ideas. And so before you start, obviously, it should be obvious to everybody that energy changes become prominent in level 4. Yeah, it should be bleeding obvious that at some point in time in your level 4 practice, energy changes, not just the nature of the thread, but also the ways in which it transitions from one thing to another become very, very important. We are now just got to the point where we can launch into what you were talking about. I don't want to call them the 8 trigrams because it's sure, in Chinese cosmology there's 8 of them, but I can think of way more than any 8. They're simply recurring changes, repairing patterns or senses of change within nature.
Come in? I don't want to take us on a huge tangent, but there's 8 core energy changes, and then from that stem the 64 sub changes, hexagrams.
Yes. So
lots and lots of changes.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And again, you got to remember that stuff is post-analysis, right? It's after the event, after we've done all this stuff, we look back at it as a bunch of very well-educated Chinese esotericists, and this is what we see emerging from it, having already done it. Yeah. That is but we didn't learn to do it by reading that stuff or seeing it written down as little lines or breaks in them. We learned how to do it, and then post-analysis, we learned to understand it on the baseline by applying this model that we call the 8 trigrams, 64 hexagrams. That's a good way to look at it. But, every shamanic culture in the world has got these concepts, and those concepts, the words we use, the 8 trigrams, that's purely from China, right? So everybody else has got that model. It's come from China. So that's a point I'd like to make around that. But what I was going to ask is how long we've been recording for, because this would be a very natural break point if that's long enough for an episode. We're about 42, 43 minutes in, I think. Yeah, I think that would be a good way to do it, because we're definitely not getting done. I'm about to launch into what Joe sort of stole my thunder there. I'm about to launch into what the trigrams or these recurring energy patterns within nature mean for level 4 energy threading.
And I was going to launch into a basic an idea for an exercise, which I will of course save for next time.
But that, to me, and if you want an exercise, if you want to finish as a practical exercise at the end of this, then the one I talked about, where you are using half Haftas, half Tyrrell, and using the Haftas side of the movement to lead as a bow weight, that's a great exercise to try. A very, very basic level 4 exercise to try. And you can actually swim with that if you get good enough at it. That exact movement, you can swim with it if you want to go and try it in the pool. It's not one of the recognized swimming strokes, and you might get some odd looks, but as I've said many times, as a shaman, you never want to care what people think of you. It's actually quite pleasant to swim like that. I do enjoy it. So that's to practice your Hatamarsh, which I don't know if that's getting better. I'm just like saying it more and more in a Western way. It feels more natural. I don't know. So there's an exercise to finish with.
It's again one of those exercises that's difficult to kind of picture without seeing it. But we've got plans in motion for that kind of stuff.
This is going to be harder and harder, mate, as we go on with the podcasts. We knew this would be a difficulty as we went through them, because a lot of this stuff there is nothing to see. That's the issue. And as you go through the layers, it gets more the case that there's nothing to see. So really what I'm trying to do with these is do two things. One is give an overview of what level 4 is about in a general interest kind of way for everybody, but then also give enough that those people who have practiced a lot of 1, 2, and 3 shamanic technique, a lot of Jersey, practice a lot of the Amsker type of what is the closest part of nature to me, a lightweight observation of self. And then how is that impacted by, I don't mean on the baseline, by physical movement. And then level 4 you can think of as what emerges out of that. What is it that emerges out of that? And what emerges out of that is part of the universe. The universe is in shamanic terms, is an enormous pattern or tapestry of energy change, of threads of energy change interweaving with each other, constantly changing and moving around each other and transforming form, but never really going away or entirely or coming back entirely. That is what the universe is in a shamanic sense, and what arises out of that level 3 practice is a small, hopefully fully integrated part of the universe. And effectively, in shamanic art, that's what you're creating. You're creating universe. That's sort of what level 4 is about.
Excellent. Right. Well, should we leave it there then, Damon?
Let's do that, mate. And then next time we can get more. It's
to be continued, ... Yeah.
Yes. Let's call the next one the 8 trigrams and stuff.
I'm not sure how many clicks that'll get, Damon, but I'll give it a go. With these really deep dive lessons, it's difficult to come up with titles that aren't logical, and I need to put my marketing emotional hat on and go, what can I call this episode to draw some clicks?
It'd be nice. I know you got it better at that than me, mate. It would be nice to have the word thread in there somewhere.
Yes, I was thinking that exact thing. So well, leave it with me.
Thanks,
all right. Well, thanks ever so much for listening. Just remember, if you can, give us an honest review wherever you listen to our podcast. It does help us get this podcast in front of people. You can head to patreon.com/wovenenergy to get more bits and bobs, more bits and pieces from this podcast, perhaps supplemental stuff. I mean, we are in the process of working out what we're going to do with Patreon, so it might be worth you signing up over there and getting involved. And I want to say thank you very much for listening. To be continued, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.